So my first question is that the Soundsuits are so joyful in person, but I understand they have a much more somber origin. Could you just talk a little bit about how you made the first one?
The first Soundsuit happened in 1992. It was in response to the Rodney King incident, which is sort of connected to the LA riots. And so that was really sort of the sort of nemesis that sort of got this sort of body of work off the ground. Prior to that, I was doing really large constructive paintings. And then, it's amazing how something so profound can sort of literally sort of shift your sort of direction of thinking and making and what have you. So the first one was made out of all twigs that I happened to be in the park, and I was just sort of thinking the intensity of just what I was reading about and sort of experiencing that the LA riots was so difficult for me, and particularly as a black male. And so it made me start to think about, looking at or the ideas of feeling sort of devalued, less than, dismissed. And so I started to think about materials in that sort of same sort of way. And so I was in the park and I looked down on the ground and there was a twig, and I don't know, I just started collecting this abundance of twigs in the park and then started to build this sculpture, and didn't really think about that I could put it on until once it was completed. And then I put it on and moved in it, and then it made sound. And so that was the sort of beginning of this sort of body of work. So really sort of building and making these sort of secondary skins or these sort of suits of armor, protection, things of that sort. That's what I was thinking about.
And so you had been doing paintings. Do
Yeah.
you feel like these relate to painting, or is it a totally different
Well, I think
process?
that, they relate to painting in terms of like a surface application. I think, for the most part, I'm really building sort of three-dimensional cloths. So it's really sort of starting with the sort of foundation cloth and then sort of thinking about ways in which, how do you sort of expand and sort of layer, embellish, adorn a surface in this sort of massive capacity.
Mm-hmm. And can you sort of walk us through the process of making any one particular Soundsuit from inspiration to construction?
Yeah. This particular button one here, the inspiration really came, well, it's always an object that sort of provokes an idea. So I don't really sketch anything. It's really that object that sort of to get my mind thinking. So it really was sort of this chair that I found. And, and I always take the object and move it around the body to find its location. And then that's when I start to then build the piece. And so this chair, I took the seat off and literally put it over my head. And so, it rests up on the shoulders, and then the front of the legs sort of are pressed against the body, that then allows the back of the chair to be pushed back. And so I wanted, and it's important for the object to be sort of identified within the piece to some degree. And then I wanted to sort of strip down materials here and sort of work with one material and just really kind of minimalize the sort of surface of that. And so here I was thinking about, a capsule. I was thinking about this sort of object that transcends us into another sort of place in time. So there's this sort of large sort of capsule type form that sort of silhouettes and isolates the body. So the figure becomes sort of contained within space.
This one, you sort of talked about feeling protected by the original Soundsuit. And this one also has quite an element of armor to it.
Oh yeah, and we wanted to, also sort of create this sort of, this sort of globe again, this sort of cavity that the body is sort of captured within by creating this sort of laced, sort of latticed sort of structure in the piece.
Now, you trained as a dancer. Are you the model of the Soundsuits in the videos that you make that you can see on your website?
In some cases, yes, but I work with a lot of performers. May it be, in some cases, some of those videos are my studio assistants. You know, I like to bring them on set to really sort of, you know, there's only one part of the process that happens in the studio. But then, you know, we then move to photography, so that's a whole nother process. So we may move to video. So I really like to provide them this sort of really broad understanding of that, you know, what happens in the studio is not where it sort of stops. We have to then sort of, you know, is it for performance? Is it, you know, is it potential for photography? But we have to photograph everything. So in still photography, I'm pretty much where everything up to now.
And what does it feel like to put one on?
Oh my God, you know, it could change. It could be all hair that's very light, but it could be, you know, something, all twigs, which, you know, it's really sort of, it's very awkward in terms of sort of holding this sort of object because it's very limp. But when it's on the body, it's sort of, the weight is distributed evenly. And so, you know, as a performer, dancer, you sort of understand posture. So you do have to sort of take a moment and get a grip and a foundation of what's happening. And then once that, you've established that, then it's pretty easy.
It feels like it would be hard not to dance once you put it on.
Well, you know what, it's very liberating on one hand because, you know, it erases gender, race, class. So, you know, it's really about forcing you to look at something without judgment at the end of the day. So it's, you know, it frees you from inhibitions and, you know, you have this sort of, again, this opportunity to sort of work outside of your norm and your comfort zone. But it can be tough, very tough. In terms of whether or not you're able to make that transition. I mean, you can't put it on and just remain yourself. You have to be willing to transition and become this other thing and whatever that is. So, you know, I don't care what that is. It's really about conviction at this point. And you sort of being able to sort of step into this sort of unfamiliar.
I wanted to get back to those twigs and how you talked about how it was important to sort of reclaim this discarded thing. Do you still think about that when you're going out and finding these materials?
Yeah, I think that's been a very sort of critical part in the development of the work and sort of continues to be really one of the main anchors is that, you know, the core sort of understructure of the work is based on found objects or materials. So, and I really want, you know, I think what it has brought me to believe is that, you know, I'm an artist with really a social conscience in terms of how I sort of think about the work and how the work sort of really helps us understand what surrounds us, you know, our surroundings and, you know, the surplus and the stuff and just the abundance of what we tend to gather and yet it's ways in which it can be sort of reconsidered, renegotiated in terms of how it may sort of move into a new function. So I'm really interested in, you know, looking at materials and looking at them with this sort of notion of option.
And what do you think the audience experience is like standing and looking at not just your Soundsuits but all of your work? Or what would you hope it would be?
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's a combination of things. I don't know. I think when I look at the work, I've seen this work before, but it's still very unfamiliar to me. It's, you know, I'm curious about it. It's, you know, again, I think it really sort of forces you to get outside of yourself. I think you're confronted, you know, with the form. I think it's a form that you can identify with. It's figurative. And so that sort of sets up this sort of one-on-one relationship. But I think that it forces you to get outside of yourself, because it really doesn't, I think the work doesn't really tend to locate itself in any sort of familiar sort of place or space that may be identifiable. And I think it really sort of bridges, this sort of multicultural sort of inherence that it sort of maintains. I mean, we could talk about Haitian voodoo flags. We could talk about African ritual. We can talk about Mardi Gras. We can sort of look at dance. And I like the sort of staticness too, because it then sort of the mind is, has this sort of curiosity of what would it be like if it was moving. So I like that sort of disposition that it has. I think, and the reason why is because when I would go to like the Field Museum of the Museum of Natural History, and you see these artifacts that, we're forced to look at them as sort of these sort of precious objects, but yet they function in a particular culture's day-to-day existence. So that sort of flipping the sort of meaning of how something's read.
Can you talk a little bit about the transition from making this work into making the standing sculptures and the wall piece in the other room?
I think, me sort of moving forward with the work has led me to sort of really remove the figure. And I think, as I'm thinking about that more and more, is that at the end of the day, it's really sort of how do I transfer the essence of the work into a new direction. So it's okay to sort of shift the direction, but how do you sort of carry over that essence? And I think in the new work, I think it really, the transitioning from this figurative work into, there's a series of paintings, what I call paintings, which are these sort of bas reliefs that are on the wall. But you still have this sort of immersive experience. You still, tend to want to just dive into the work and really indulge yourself in the complexity of how it's built. Again, there is that found object that's very prevalent in the work. And I think it's still sort of, it's based on, with that as the foundation. And it's sort of, collaging in a different sort of sense.